Hello everybody, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics. I am super excited to bring you part one of an interview I did with the Fritz team. I promise you're going to learn so much about the bacteria inside your tank. And after listening to this, I think you're going to be convinced the bacteria are the most important organism living in that little mini ecosystem that you've built. This is part one. Next week will be part two. Thanks for being here. Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Primetime Aquatics. I am at the Fritz location. I've been wanting to come here for so long, and today we have got a great video for you because I've got Mike and I've got Josh here from Fritz, and combined they are giant mega minds of all things aquarium. And so I thought it would be really cool just to talk about Fritz. I know you've got a lot of history, you know, especially when it comes to nitrifying bacteria and stuff like that. And then Josh, you're like the micro guy. So for those of you who've been wanting to get in the weeds about beneficial bacteria in your aquarium, that's happening in this video. So Mike, I think we just start with you, and you've got a little history in terms of how these products came to be. And
I started Fritz, showing my age besides my gray hair, 23 years ago. I'd been a hobbyist all my life and came in at Fritz actually working as creative services and eventually came into sales. When I first started, I worked at pet stores growing up as a teenager, and I remember Fritzheim 7 and 9. I mean, it's been around that long. It's been around since the late 70s, early 80s. And when they first brought me in, you know, I was skeptical. There's products out there that claim to cycle quickly and don't work. And so my boss made me set up a 75-gallon Mbuna tank in my office, loaded up with fish, and we used our Turbo Start, and it's worked as amazingly as it does today. You'll see, you've shot some video of our system here, how we grow nitrifiers. So we've been growing nitrifiers for a long time. Josh is our newest employee here. He's running our R&D. Josh is a microbiologist. I found him. We were looking for someone, and I went on LinkedIn and I typed in microbiologist, aquarium, coral. And this man shows up. His picture shows up, and he lives 10 miles away. Wow. He had experience with FDA, EPA, quality systems, and then he was, I call him my unicorn. I probably should stop calling him that, but he had everything we needed, and he loved fish, and he had experience with marine tanks, and we brought him on, and he's been working to improve our nitrifiers, working on our yields, working on the quality of the product. But our nitrifiers absolutely are our flagship product. They work very well. They are, I think, a necessity for every aquarist to ensure you're going to start a system and be successful, and keep that system successful.
Yep.
So,
oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, so Fritzheim 7, Fritzheim Turbo Start, and you got Fritzheim 9, right? And the numbers, people always ask about the numbers. So what is the difference between Fritzheim 7 and Fritzheim 9?
Okay, so Fritzheim 7 is our freshwater species. We grow both freshwater species and saltwater species. Freshwater species are 7, and Turbo Start 700 is a concentration of that, approximately a 10x. 9 is saltwater species, and 900 is the Turbo Start of the saltwater species. And a lot of people ask me, where does 7 and 9 come from? And is 7th the 7th formula or the 7th iteration? It's Fritz Wisen was the man who started Fritz Industries, and he was a numbers guy. So 7 and 9 were his lucky numbers, and that's why he named that product 7 and 9. So I wish there was a more scientific nature to, or explanation to 7 and 9, but those were his lucky numbers.
And part of me always thought it had something to do with pH or how it's buffered, but no, it is just the numbers.
He was a lucky numbers guy.
That is awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
he was a character, but he was a very smart man, and he loved fish, loved aquariums, and you know, when he recognized the problem with people cycling new systems, he was a guy that would just throw everything at it, and as you can see, our system, he put that together, and today we're the largest grower of nitrifiers in the world.
Do you have anything awesome coming up? Any Anything Fritz is working on that you think
We're
will be
working on some
exciting?
different concentrations. We sell a lot of our, as far as nitrifiers, we actually have a 10x of our Turbo Start that we're selling. So we have some big zoos right now. We have a 500,000 gallon system. I'm sorry, yeah, yes, a 500,000 gallon system going up in Florida that they're going to be cycling, and then a big facility in San Diego is looking to cycle. So on the professional side, our product is basically what's used.
Yeah.
All the big facilities use our nitrifiers for their quarantine systems, for their big exhibits. So we have, instead of shipping 50 gallons of Turbo Start, I can ship 5 gallons of this 10X. Same biomass, less water, less weight being shipped, save on freight, and they use it. We make it to order, they get it the day they need it, and they can cycle their system very quickly.
And that was something I don't think I fully appreciated. Obviously, I'm involved with Fritz retail side, and I understand that, but the amount of work you do on the public side of things,
Absolutely, yeah.
big time volumes.
We do a lot of salt in public aquariums. We do our nitrifiers, of course. We just started bringing in the Vitalis fish food in the UK that all the professional facilities are using. I actually just hired a full-time sales guy who is a herpetologist from the Dallas Zoo to handle that side of our business for us. So he was the curator at a small aquarium here in Dallas. But yeah, our nitrifiers, we do a lot in not only public facilities, but also for aquaculture. Like we're working with a salmon farm up in Washington on some system stuff and biological products for them.
That's awesome, awesome. Well, I know you're a busy guy, and we've taken up your entire weekend. We were at the ACA together all weekend, and that was a lot of fun. When we're filming this, it's a Monday, so I'll let you get to your work, man.
We'll let Josh talk.
All right, so now I'm here with Josh, and I'm really excited to talk to you because microbiology nerd. I've been teaching it for 18 years. Yeah. And so we talk about this stuff, and I was floored when we got to go into the facility and see those things. I talk about growth curves, and I talk about optimal conditions and wastewater treatment. Yeah. And then I come here, it's like, we're doing this thing. This is happening in real life. And so give me a little bit of your background before we even get started in the nitrifiers.
Yeah, so my background's, it's kind of unusual. So I got my degrees from UTA and everything, bachelor's microbiology, master's biology. a lot of my thesis research, stuff like that was on coral immunity, coral diseases. So, and during the whole time I'm working at the Dallas Aquarium at Fair Park. So I volunteered there for about 4 years. And, it was one of those things I just volunteered in an aquarium because it was fun. I wanted to learn about stuff. And when I got to school, I found a lab. I'm knocking on their door like, please, can I wash the dishes and all that other stuff, just get me in. And so I spent about like 3 years in that lab, got out, and I'm in the real world now. So where am I going to get a job like that? Whatever. So I get out at a water treatment facility, moved down there, San Antonio, where y'all guys were just at. We had a really unusual system. We had a mechanical filtration that we used instead of chemical. So they ended up moving their facility up Minnesota, went up to Minnesota, worked water treatment and everything for another year. Decided I wanted to get back to Texas, where my family was. So I go back to Texas and everything for a job at food microbiology. So I did a lot of like food microbiology testing, stuff like that. I worked as a technical manager over there. So was over there for about 3 years. Had a buddy of mine. He knew I wanted to get out of that place. I'm not going to say where it was. So he got me a job at a cosmetics facility. So I went from, so during when I was in grad school, I also worked at a medical microbiology facility. So I went from medical to water treatment to food, and then I went to cosmetics. So, and then the cosmetics were like OTC products too, so a little bit of pharma. So I ran the gamut and everything, and I was, happy the place I was at and everything, but I kind of strayed away from what I originally went to, which was, aquatics and corals and all that other stuff. And then Mike actually just shot me a message on LinkedIn. I happened to see it. He was like, hey, you interested in, microbiology position? And I looked at the company and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, so went over, interviewed and everything, and looked at the place, looked at the nitrifiers, all the stuff that was coming up and everything, and made another career change. So that's kind of how I ended up here. So I went from a whole lot of microbiology, quality systems, regulations, stuff like that. Just basically like a Swiss Army knife of like random, things that all came together. And now working here, I pretty much do all of that and then work on the technology side of it. So it's been a wild ride, but I really love the place I'm at right now.
That's awesome. It sounds like you found your happy place.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy how like life kind of like, you end up where you're at, just different.
So can we talk, before we get into the process here, because a lot of my viewers always have questions just about the nitrifiers, the beneficial bacteria in their aquarium, right? And so what do you think are some of the more important species of bacteria that accomplish the nitrification process?
So, and again, just kind of taking a step back, with nitrifying bacteria, I remember when I started out, I was iffy too, right? Because, there's so much back and forth and everything, especially on forums and all that. So I got in here, and when I started doing the testing myself, and we have a quality control process and everything, where we actually look for nitrification. So initially I was like, all right, does this stuff really work? So when I went into the lab and I started testing it myself, it's like, oh my gosh, like it actually does it. You can see it and everything. So that was interesting. And when I started digging deeper onto kind of like what was going on in the manufacturing process and everything, the species that most people associate with nitrification, it'll depend on freshwater and saltwater. So the freshwater nitrifiers, and freshwater was something that I kind of had like less like experience with, because I'm mainly like a reef guy. So, but the you usually hear nitrosomonas or nitrosomonas. You hear nitrobacter, you hear nitrococcus. So, and then nitrobacter can function both in salt water and freshwater. So you kind of got a mixtures of that. So depending on if you have fresh or salt water, you'll have different species.
Now, are there bacteria that are more beneficial from going, let's say, ammonia to nitrite compared to nitrite to nitrate?
Correct. So, with the nitrogen cycle and everything going from ammonia to nitrite to nitrate, nitrobacter is kind of your main anchor for the nitrate to, or the nitrite to nitrate. I'm always looking at like NO2, NO3 in my head. Nitrosomonas and nitrococcus, those are freshwater and saltwater, like respectively. Those are the ones that are getting you from ammonia to the nitrite.
Okay.
So it gets a little confusing and everything. We've had debates on species and all that, but those are the primary ones that people usually think about in the trade. But it's important to note that they're not the only ones.
Right.
So, you can say that, hey, you have a specific species, you have this specific species, and people get into like the technical ratios and everything, like, what's the percent composition of this product and everything. When it comes down to it, you're really looking for, okay, what's the conversion? Yeah. What does the conversion look like? And that's kind of like with our product where it's special. So our product, you can't really duplicate. And going through the history of the nitrifiers, and I think we can kind of touch on that later. But
okay, so I get this question, and I have an answer for it, but I want to get your opinion on it. You got a brand new aquarium.
Yep.
You put in, it's a kid's aquarium. Everything is sterile, right? The gravel, the decorations, the filter media. Let's just assume there's no live plants. It's all plastic plants, right? So you've got essentially this brand new ecosystem with nothing in it.
Yeah.
You throw some fish in there, and they start producing ammonia. Now, if you don't do anything, you're going to wind up with an inevitable ammonia spike and then the nitrite later on, right?
Yeah.
But eventually, even if you don't add anything, if the fish survive, 6 weeks, 8 weeks later, you wind up with an aquarium that has a semi-functional ecosystem, right? At least in terms of microbes. Where did the microbes come from?
So it can be a number of things, especially with saltwater aquariums. I don't know if you want me to go with saltwater specifically or freshwater, whichever.
I'm pretty much all freshwater.
Okay, so all freshwater. A lot of the times you have different bacteria that can come in on like either surfaces from your livestock. So you can get kind of like livestock, gravel, anything like that. Now, if you have a complete sterile environment, it gets a little bit tricky, but if you just have a sterile environment, then you're not getting the amount of bacteria that is going to enable your system to kind of buffer out to be healthy. So yeah, you can get nitrifying bacteria that kind of comes in, but in order to get like an equilibrium that really allows you to, add in livestock, start growing your system, you need something to kind of like create a buffer for that so that you have a conversion rate that facilitates a healthy livestock population.
Good. I'm glad we're on the same page. I've always told people the same thing. I'm like, well, you will eventually get the beneficial bacteria. Where does it come from? The fish, right?
Yeah.
So when you add the fish to an aquarium, they came from an aquarium that had beneficial bacteria. They would be little hitchhikers, not in high concentrations, of course, but enough where you can go through the inevitable tank crash, because it's what's going to happen without using something like a Fritz 7 or a turbo start, but it will eventually get there. So with the bacteria that accomplish the nitrification cycle, and this is something I know you guys are working on a lot, but just in a general aquarium, what would you say, because most people think about water parameters as it pertains to their fish, and sometimes the focus isn't on the ecosystem itself. And I've always maintained the microbes are every bit, if not more important than the fish, because without the microbes, the fish aren't living, right? So what would you say, generally speaking, for a freshwater aquarium where you're hitting pretty close to optimal conditions for the bacteria?
So for the bacteria, a lot of people, they'll look at pH, they'll look at temperature and everything. One of the most important things is going to be alkalinity. Okay. So with alkalinity, you need to keep your alkalinity levels up to the point where you get nitrification actually occurring. Okay. So in order to convert, say, if you had 1 milligram of ammonia nitrogen, in order to convert that and get that from that to nitrite to nitrate, you need about, I think it's 7.14 milligrams per liter of alkalinity as calcium carbonate.
Do you know what that converts to in terms of either degrees hardness or ppm?
So I'm thinking of it like scientifically and like kind of the equations behind it. You get, I think it's like the conversions around like 4 to 7, I think, DKH. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for people, if they're running less than 4 degrees on their, what would be KH, right? They're going to have a problem. Yeah,
so you'll need to supplement it, and that's to actually allow, because you can think of these things as little machines. And that's what I taught for about 2 years too. And I would tell my students, think of the bacteria as kind of like little factories. So in order to get that factory running, you need to have raw material. So giving the alkalinity and getting your pH and temperature, you're essentially giving raw material to your little factories. So in order to get like your output, your finished product and everything, you want your raw material to be coming through in a good enough quantity to actually make sure your factories run.
And that brings up an interesting point. And I get questions all the time or comments. My tank had a pH of, let's say, 7.0. And I had a KH that was low. It was around 5 or 6. But over time, my KH goes to 0 and my pH crashes. Why is that happening?
Well, I mean, it can be a number of reasons. So there are a lot of things going on in your tank. If you look at the aquarium as an enclosed ecosystem, which it is, it starts to make more like sense of different things happening. The main thing, like you said, biological. So microbiological processes, metabolism, things like that, that can cause fluctuation in water parameters. Specifically with nitrifiers, if nitrifiers are converting that ammonia or nitrite and nitrate, if they're doing all those conversions, they're using up like those raw materials like I was talking about. So you can get decreases in your alkalinity just through those biological processes. And it's the same thing with pH. So the more like raw materials that your little factories are using up, the difference in your parameters are going to happen. So through the nitrification process, naturally they're going to start lowering the alkalinity.
Okay, so we've covered the KH. Obviously, that's really important. So somewhere 4 to 7.
Yeah.
You go lower than that, you're going to have problems. Generally, no problems if you go higher, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're at 15 to 20, that's not really going to impact your beneficial bacteria. For the pH side of things, there's a range. I always tell my students, microbes have a range when it comes to pH in which they will thrive. For the nitrifying bacteria, what is that optimal range?
So generally, we see in the literature and everything, you're going to see 7.0 to 8.2. What we found is, aquariums don't really necessarily follow like the scientific literature, because you have to look at like the papers that are written and everything. They're looking at 1 or 2 or 3 species. They're not looking at your entire tank. The things that we grow here are more complicated. So throughout the history of our manufacturing process and everything, we've seen generally like your pH that you want to hit is like generally 7 to that 8, but you can go slightly above that 8. So there's a little bit of wiggle room. Now it's important to mention that at pH like 6, you start getting and I don't know how deep we want to go, like
as deep as
chemistry-wise.
Let's go.
So if you have ammonia and nitrogen, you have it in different forms. So you have NH4 and then you have NH3, your ammonium versus your ammonia. So around pH 6, you have more ammonium.
Yeah.
And then once your pH starts, getting higher, you start switching to ammonia. In
The UI.
Yeah.
UIA. So, and my viewers, if they've watched my channel, I did a video one time because some of the test kits, they don't distinguish between ionized ammonia and unionized ammonia. And so you can get, oh my gosh, I've got an ammonia spike. Well, maybe not, because take a look at your pH. And that's why I asked the question. As you're explaining, as the pH goes down, that unionized ammonia is not there, right? And so what you have is ionized ammonia, which is not going to be toxic to your fish.
Yeah, and we did a deep dive on this and kind of like the toxicology of the ammonia versus the ammonia. It gets kind of technical. There are reasons why your ammonia is like more toxic.
Yeah.
But in general, once you get to the ammonia stage, the NH3, like I'm always looking at the chemistry, like the equations and everything. Once it gets to the ammonia, you have that nitrification step. Now, there's still kind of a discussion, like a back and forth in the scientific community, whether nitrification occurs with ammonium or ammonia. And you see different papers at different times talking about that, the nitty-gritty part of it.
Yeah.
And if you like go on Google or go on Chat, GTP or whatever, and you type this stuff in, you're going to get one answer, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the concise thing. So there's still a little bit of gray area in that.
So if you take that out of the aquarium and you would, let's say, venture to a river system in South America, where that pH, I'm looking at these Ultim Angels, and they're finally out, and you can't see them on camera, but trust me, there are Ultim Angels there. They're looking insane. So those fish, often in nature, you might find them in a pH of 5, right? But also, if you test the water, you're not finding ammonia, right? I don't know the answer to this question. Are they finding ammonium, the ionized form? And if they're not, then there's got to be there's microbes there still accomplishing the nitrification process.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, the back and forth where people debate like the specific equation for nitrification and everything. But again, you have to look at those are the bacteria that have been studied.
Right.
So in a lot of these ponds and everything, or these river systems, you might have bacteria that are utilizing that ammonium. And the pH, basically you have an environment where things are selected for. So if there's excess ammonium within an environment and it's being converted, then that might be a species that we haven't seen before in the literature, or things that you can't really gene sequence or you can gene sequence it, but when you go to look at the species, we don't have, the database doesn't have the exact species, or the taxonomy is weird, things like that. So
Or you're doing epigenetic studies and you're trying to figure out, we've got a dozen species here, and now we're
Yeah.
trying to piece it all back together, which makes sense. So if you have an aquarium, so back to our aquarium situation, and let's say you're keeping the Altum Angels, the Epistos, and you're like, okay, I'm going to roll with about a 5.5 pH. Maybe it's going to hit 6, but let's say it's in the 5s, because people will do that sometimes. And at that point, in the aquarium, let's take it a step further. I'm going to go crazy.
All right.
Okay, so we're going to stretch your brain a
Yes.
bit. You've got an aquarium. We're keeping Altums. Someone wants to keep the Altums, but they don't want any live plants.
Okay.
All right? You put the fish in the tank. What's going to happen with the ammonia?
I mean, if you have you're saying a pH like
5.5.
5.5.
Yeah.
So the majority of your like ammonium is going to be in that ammonium stage. So you're going to have it in that stage.
Right.
Now, if you're getting like an increase in ammonium, because like you have to remember, if you look at the curve for this might be getting kind of like too in there. If you look at the curve between the chemical equation for the conversion of ammonium to ammonia, you'll kind of see like, and then it hits an exponential. You'll still get a little bit of that conversion, but you're not going to get a rapid conversion like you're going to see in a higher pH.
Sure. And so essentially then, if you did that, you're not necessarily worried about an ammonia spike, I guess,
Yeah.
like you would be if it was a tank closer to, let's say, a pH of 7.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so we know now that our KH, our carbonate hardness, needs to be at least 4 to 7. More is fine. If you go below that, you're going to have to start supplementing. We understand that our pH somewhere around that 7 to 8 is going to be ideal for most of our beneficial
Ideal is a little bit higher. So
yeah,
you
ideal is a
want
little bit higher. And also keeping in mind, if your pH is lower, then your issue is not going to be as dramatic because you're not dealing with the UIA, you're dealing with ionized ammonia, and so it's not as big of an issue anyway. Is there a point as we go up in pH? Because I've got friends who keep, I don't know how many people have heard of soda lake cichlids, but
the 9 or 11
they're
the crazy. Yeah.
So not only are they keeping them at a pH of 9, but then they're running those temperatures close to 90 degrees, and the water hardness is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So at what point, again, just like we talked about low pH, is there a point at which, man, this pH is so high? Like if we go 8.5, 8.6, 8.7, at what point are we starting to experience another problem with our nitrifiers?
So I can tell you with our products, kind of like what we've seen, they can tolerate like higher. So they can tolerate like higher temperatures. Once you kind of get past the 85 degree, then it starts becoming a problem. At pH, once you get kind of like 8.5 to 9, that's when we start seeing issues.
Okay. And so that would bring up another question then, going back to nature, right? Flipping back to nature again. You go to Lake Tanganyika, right? Or some of those satellite lakes. And again, you're not going to find ammonia there, right? The fish aren't all dying. Oh my gosh, ammonia spiked because the pH is, getting high. Is there, there's most likely then unstudied nitrifiers in those lakes.
There's got to be something else happening.
Yeah. And the thing there is, there's not a ton of plants either in some of those lakes. And something we haven't talked about yet, the dissolved oxygen there is ridiculously low. And so let's go there.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's the next thing. And so many people, when they're looking at their water parameters, we talk about GH and KH and pH and even temperature, which we've already kind of addressed. But what about the dissolved oxygen? How does that play a role?
So dissolved oxygen we have found is super critical. So a lot of our, even in the field, like Mike was talking about salmon farms, things like that and everything, we'll measure the dissolved oxygen. So usually with a dissolved oxygen, we're shooting for like 7.0 to like 7.2, 7.5, around there in terms of milligrams per liter of dissolved oxygen.
Okay.
So if you get a lower dissolved oxygen, if you get something like lower than like 6.5, they'll still work, but it's going to be suboptimal work.
Okay.
So you'll still get like nitrification, but the dissolved oxygen is kind of like if you're racing a car, nitrous oxide or something like that.
Sure.
You want, to have that extra umph.
Yep.
And whenever you get that extra umph, you get a higher conversion rate.
Yeah.
So dissolved oxygen is key from what we've seen.
Okay, so last thing, because we didn't really cover it in detail, the temperatures, right? I mean, people will keep goldfish in the or ponds in the 50s and 60s. You can go all the way up, like we talked about the soda lake cichlids you mentioned. There's an upper limit somewhere around, what, 86-ish or so, where you start to see a pretty dramatic drop off in your nitrifiers. How low can you go?
That is something that, interestingly, we've seen, because a lot of the stuff that we've done in the field have those conditions that most people won't find in their aquariums. So we're talking 40 degrees, we're talking 45, 50, those kind of temperatures. We've actually seen nitrification occurring at those lower temperatures. Now, it's not optimal, so it's one of those things where you have a lot of the publication talks about, okay, under a certain point, nitrification stops. With our product, the measurements that we've been doing, you still have activity. Okay. So it's just not as optimal.
And if you think about it, both in nature and in aquarium, if you were running a tank that low, usually that is not something you're doing on a consistent basis. Maybe you're overwintering a pond, or you've got a tank, generally speaking, you're not running it in the 40s and 50s unless you're keeping a cold water species, but then you're not eating as much either, right? And so the metabolism slows down and your bio load isn't going to be as great. So if your nitrifiers are running a little slow, that's probably because your fish metabolism is also, they're slowing down too, right? All right, everyone, thank you so much for being here. If you want to learn more about the nitrogen cycle, check out that video in the upper right-hand corner. If you want to learn more about the Fritz products, check out that video in the lower right-hand corner. Don't forget, next week we will have part 2. We are going to dig a lot deeper into what it means to add nitrifying bacteria to your aquarium. Thanks for being here.